This morning I was featured on an episode of Weekend Update on NPR, and after what I tell you next, I can promise you you will never hear me on NPR again. The topic was how influencers are impacting journalism, and it featured me and Summer Harlow from the Night School for Journalism. We taped for 30 minutes, but only 7 minutes of the interview aired. Summer was introduced by all her credentials, as she has earned them, and I was introduced as V-Spear Newsfluencer, to which I said, "What is a newsfluencer? I've never heard that term." I've linked to the interview because I do want you to listen to it for yourself. Specifically, I want you to listen for me. You know my cadence, you know how I speak, and what you're going to hear in this interview is a Frankensteining of my voice. Because this is a wonderful example of, did I say these words? Yes. But did they have that meaning? Were those the conclusions that I came to when saying those words, or did they cut me off mid-sentence to reinforce their narrative? The narrative that anyone who delivers the news online is somehow less than or not a journalist or not a professional. But like the professional I am, I keep notes of what I say on the podcasts I do. So here's what I actually said. Summer had said that she created this newsfluencer class to make a certification or some sort of professional credential for newsfluencers, as she calls them, so that we would know who is trained and trustworthy versus who is not. I don't think that we need academia applying some form of professionalization to an industry that we created that you still don't really understand. Many of us are professional lawyers, teachers, social workers, military experts, journalists, and we are using that expertise that we have in real life to deliver a message online. The next question I was asked is about how I employ ethics and the fact that I don't have an editorial board. How can people really trust me to make sure that I'm getting information correct? Now, you will hear me say, I do have a board of ethics. It's my audience. Every single day I have to earn their trust, and when I'm wrong, they tell me. I follow that up by saying many of the biggest journalists in the world right now, with the most respect, didn't go to J school. When did they become a journalist? Like Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. He didn't go to J school. He came out of the Navy and started writing stories for the newspaper. Was he a journalist when he started to investigate things that other people wouldn't touch, or was he a journalist when he won his first Pulitzer Prize? When did he become a journalist? Citizen-led journalism, peer journalism has been a thing forever. Oral storytelling is a cultural part of the way that many people communicate. The way that they communicate doesn't make them any less professional or trustworthy or right. All of that cut from the interview. Then they say, well, this is an unproven place for delivering news. And I said, yeah, and that's what the newspapers said about radio, and that's what radio said about TV, and that's what TV is now saying about social media or digital media. He then asked me about influencers being given special treatment at the DNC and the RNC, to which I said, no, they weren't. If I were writing a newsletter for the Washington Post, you would have no problem with me getting access to senior officials because you respect that particular form of journalism or that outlet. But because I make my videos and do news on TikTok, you think it's somehow silly or less than. I was asked to be on this particular interview to talk about the pending TikTok ban, not to defend the work that we have done on this platform for the last 4 years. The end of this interview, of which I felt like I had to defend myself the entire time and constantly remind them that I do have credentials from working at the LA Times and the Washington Post and NBC, and that their idea that people who deliver news online are somehow less than or not professional or not to be trusted is wrong, was followed up by them cutting the last question that I think was the most important one. He asked me, well, what are you going to do when TikTok gets banned? In a sort of gleeful way. At least I interpreted it as glee from Legacy Media because they love the idea of a TikTok ban. I'm going to read to you now my exact answer. The TikTok ban was upheld in a lower court based on government assertions of foul play on behalf of the platform that were submitted in secret. The government's declarations are secret evidence that TikTok's lawyers were not given access to as part of discovery. And the court said, no worries, because we made our choice to uphold that TikTok ban without even looking at the secret documents. So you never need to see them. This evidence that the government say so, you don't need to see it. The court's extreme deference to government say-so in lieu of evidence of foul play or a trial is dangerous and a threat to the First Amendment and democracy writ large. That's the story that NPR's listeners would want to hear, and that's not the story anyone in Legacy is covering because you're all too gleeful to see TikTok, this thing that annoys you, disappear. Legacy Media sees the TikTok ban as eliminating competition instead of the very real threat to the entire industry of journalism a ban on free speech would be. Another thing that came up during this interview that I think was wrong was the assertion that the public somehow does not have media literacy and thereby cannot be trusted to engage with news content online because they'll just believe mis and disinformation and lies. That media literacy and reading comprehension are different things, okay? I think the public is smart, and I think that we do have media literacy. I think we know a bullshitter when we see one. So the reason why I'm so popular is because I meet people where they're at. I know they're watching me when they're in the bathroom or when they're in bed or on a break quick. I only have 90 seconds to get them some information that sparks their curiosity enough that they will take the limited amount of leisure time they have to investigate this further. The workforce is exploited. We don't have as much leisure time or money to engage in news and conversation. We don't have the money for cable to watch legacy media on TV, the 6 o'clock news like we used to. We don't have the leisure time left over to enjoy reading a newspaper. We don't have the morning commute of an hour some to listen to NPR. We're not having that driveway moment anymore, to quote NPR, where we finally get home after a long day's work, but we're just so engaged in the story we're hearing on NPR that we sit in our driveway and finish the story. We don't have time, we don't have money. We're an overly exhausted and exploited people. I have 90 seconds, and I use it to the best of my ability. That's why people trust me. I tell them the truth, and my editorial board is my audience. But you won't hear any of that in this NPR piece, because it didn't fit the narrative that they had when they crafted this programming. And that is why, I'm sure, I will never be invited back on their show again. And that is why I will continue to fight for this platform, where we can meet, tell the truth, and be real. I have linked to this interview in my bio, not because I think it's a good representation of me, but because I think it's a great exercise for us to learn the ways that legacy media will chop up the truth to continue to drive their own narratives.